Imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the master of fun and wonder, and of course, the existential Mr. Rogers. That would be me, Robert Meyer Burnett, the host of this, ROBSERVATIONS, the show about something. This is ROBSERVATIONS live stream number 276. My God, and you out there watching me now, are imagination connoisseurs par excellence. Imagination connoisseurs that are part of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. Whether you're live or watching this later, you're all part of the community. And isn't it great to be part of a community? I think it is. And as you all know, this community is, well, it's helped. It's helped by Lucky Tiger men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com and you buy anything and you check out and you use PGS for this community's name, Post-Geek Singularity, you get 20% off your orders. And I also want to remind you, Lucky Tiger has given me 4 bottles of their overall body wash, their head-to-tail body wash, as they like to say, which I think is delightful. Whether you're a girl or a boy, let me just tell you, or however you identify yourself, I think this head-to-tail body wash is delightful. It's for everyone, and we're giving away a bottle a week. And all you have to do is go to the website and comment on anything at Burnettwork.net. Doesn't matter. Just comment on anything. And you will get entered into a random drawing for a bottle of Lucky Tiger men's, well, all over body wash. I want to say it's not just all of their product. It's their head to tail body wash. And we're going to give away 4 every week leading up to the 300th episode of this show. So that's pretty exciting. Unfortunately, it's only open to people in North America. So all of my beautiful and lovely European audience members, or Australian or Asian or Russian, wherever you are in the world, if you don't live in North America, you cannot get a free bottle of Lucky Tiger head to tail body wash. I'm sorry about that. But you know what? Perhaps on the next giveaway, I will be able to send it worldwide. You know, some channels give away PlayStations. I give away bottles of body wash. But don't say that I didn't ever try and give you something. A lot of interesting things going on that I wanted to share with this show today. I thought there was some good stuff, and I want to just let's just start. So today at 4 a.m., I guess Pacific Standard Time, PST, this article went up by George Zalai, and Etan Vlessing, 4 o'clock this morning on the Hollywood Reporter's website. Viacom's Paramount Pictures returns to full year profit after 3 years of losses. That's right. Our beloved Paramount that's going to remerge with Viacom. They've been bifurcated since 2005. They're coming back together. And you know what that means. That's right. Paramount and Viacom, the people that control Star Trek, are coming back together as one big family. But Paramount has been in dire straits the last 3 years. So it's pretty great that they have a full year of profit. Let me read this article to you. The company, led by CEO Bob Bakish, reported what are expected to be its final financials before its merger with CBS Corporation, or Viacom, which is expected to close in early December. Viacom, the company behind Paramount Pictures and such cable networks as MTV, Nickelodeon, BET, Comedy Central, and Paramount Network, on Thursday reported better than expected fiscal fourth quarter earnings and a return to a full fiscal year profit for the Paramount studio for the first time in several years. Its film unit posted its 11th quarterly bottom line improvement in a row, allowing Paramount's film unit to return to a full fiscal year profit of $78 million. Now, that's a movie studio. So for everybody who thinks that movie studios, we keep hearing these billion-dollar numbers thrown around. Paramount Pictures had a full fiscal year profit of $78 million. Let that sink in. I mean, I know it's a lot of money for you and I, but for a company like Paramount, it's not exactly, the road to nirvana, but it's a start. Paramount had recorded an adjusted operating loss of $39 million for the previous fiscal year ending in September 2018 after an operating loss of $208 $80 million in the fiscal year before that, and a loss of $445 million in the fiscal year ending in September of 2016. Its adjusted operating profit for the fiscal year ended in September 2015 had amounted to $111 million. So they went from $111 million the next year down to a $445 million loss in September of 2016. But now they're at $78 million. They're building back up again. A studio that was basically a smoldering ruin. Viacom, led by CEO Bob Bakish, Thursday reported what are expected to be its final results before its merger with CBS Corp, which, like Viacom, is controlled by the Redstone family's National Amusements. The mega deal unveiled this summer is expected to close in early December. Bakish, on a morning analyst's call, said planning to fold both companies into one was well underway. This integration is not just about cost savings, it's about extracting more value from our content, he said, while pointing to a focus on revenue opportunities and cost synergies. On the revenue front, Bakish underlined efforts to boost content distribution and affiliate fees, U.S. advertising sales, and income from content licensing. This is important because it leads into my story. Content licensing and streaming, which will cross free and pay TV markets and include CBS All Access and Showtime. We're uniting a Hollywood film slate with substantial TV production across multiple entities, whether that's CBS, Showtime, or Viacom Media Networks and Paramount TV, he said, as Bakish surveyed the Viacom CBS waterfront. The combined entity will also support Viacom CBS's own production divisions and third-party platforms. This will include licensing IP to rivals, as with Paramount Pictures on Thursday, announcing it had licensed the sequel rights to Beverly Hills Cop to Netflix for a fourth edition of the popular franchise to star Eddie Murphy and be produced by Jerry Bruckheimer. Much of the analyst call was devoted to what Viacom CBS is expected to retain in production and library content and what it will sell to rivals to feed its bottom line. Demand for content from third parties is incredible, and the combination of our assets and capabilities with the fact that some of our competitors are pulling back makes this sector an enormous opportunity for Viacom CBS. Bakish also touted Paramount as an iconic Hollywood studio set to be a jewel in Viacom CBS's crown. The library is truly irreplaceable. This is an asset that we love to own, and we love the momentum we're seeing, and the road ahead is really exciting. The studio, led by Chairman and CEO Jim Giannopoulos, by the way, one of the most respected men in the entertainment business, who was earlier this week confirmed as continuing his role after Viacom's merger with CBS Corp has grown its TV production business, managed costs, and turned around its theatrical business, Viacom reported. Jim Giannopoulos he was basically the way Obama took over during one of our worst economic crises in this country since the Great Depression. Jim Giannopoulos came on board Paramount and basically has turned Paramount around. And the fact that they're retaining him is a big deal. It's also a very cool deal, and I'm very excited. Full-year film revenue grew 1%, driven by licensing and ancillary revenues, which were partially offset by lower theatrical revenues due to a rough comparison with Mission Impossible Fallout in the previous year. The licensing revenue improvement was driven by growth in TV production, the firm said. Ancillary revenue grew 33% for the full year, driven by licensing fees from international theme parks and new music rights agreements. Adjusted operating income at the film unit for the fiscal fourth quarter increased 42% to $54 million. Film releases in the latest period included Dora and the Lost City of Gold and Crawl, which I told you all I just saw and I really liked it. Plus, Rocket Man continued to contribute. Licensing revenue jumped 26% for the quarter, driven by growth in TV production. This is good. Now, it's the beginning, but Paramount, we don't want to lose another studio. I know that Sony is probably on the chopping block, but so is Paramount. I'm sure the crows were circling, and this really gives me hope. Now, I think it's great that this is happening. So Paramount made some money for the first time in 3 years. The studio did, at least. Here's my second article. This was posted at 9:13, 5 hours later. This was posted also on The Hollywood Reporter, and this was reported by Alex Wiepren. Ted Sarandos talks Disney Plus launch and a Netflix future focused on original content. Ted Sarandos is the head of Netflix. Sarandos, who spoke at the Paley Center for Media's International Council Summit in New York, also clarified that, quote, all entertainment is truth to power. Netflix content chief Ted Sarandos clarified comments made earlier this month by Netflix CEO Reed Hastings, in which he said the streaming service is not in the, quote, truth to power business, after being asked about a decision to pull an offensive episode of the comedy show Patriot Act from Saudi Arabia. Sarandos, speaking at the Paley Center for Media's International Council Summit in New York on Thursday, said of Hastings' comments, I don't know if it was not a great choice of words or if he misspoke. I think of all entertainment as being truth to power. All creative expression is truth to power, Sarandos told the interviewer, actor and comedian Chris Redd, citing stand-up comedy and other types of content that reflect the real world. I think what he was getting at is we are not really in the breaking news business. We are an entertainment company primarily. Sarandos also downplayed Netflix's concerns about Disney Plus's launch. For us, nothing really changes, he said of the launch. They are great at what they do. They're great storytellers. It's great to have competition. Disney on Wednesday revealed that Disney Plus had garnered more than 10 million signups since its launch the day before. Disney Plus, 10 million signups since its launch the day before, instantly making Disney Plus one of the biggest subscription streaming services in the U.S. Netflix executives, including Sarandos and Hastings, have long downplayed the threat of Disney Plus, arguing that the rising tide of streaming services will lift all boats. At a conference call this month, Hastings said that he planned to subscribe to Disney Plus, calling it an amazing company. Sarandos on Thursday also addressed the service's shift from library content to originals, acknowledging that acquired shows make up a sizable portion of the Netflix viewership. Of course, he has to say that Netflix has lost a lot of stuff, such as The Office and, of course, Friends, which they spent $500 million for Friends for a final year before it goes away forever to HBO Max. There's a lot of viewing that comes from licensed content from other people because there's a lot of it. And for a while, it was all we had, he said, adding that shows like Friends and The Office also have hundreds of episodes. Ultimately, however, the company is planning for a future where almost all of the content on the service is originals. I think one way or another will end up there. In a post-interview question and answer session with the audience, former BET CEO Deborah Lee asked Sarandos whether he had seen a Saturday Night Live sketch making fun of Netflix's programming decisions. Sarandos said he was a huge fan of the comedy show and thought the sketch was hilarious. When you're spoofed on SNL, you have arrived, he said. I just wish they'd used my name. So what does that bring us to? Well, that brings us to today's announcement, where Paramount, who is bullish on licensing their material, even though they're going to be part of, well, the new CBS Corp, well, I guess that's what it's called now, Viacom. They have CBS All Access, which they could be making stuff for. Paramount and Netflix today announced this, and this was reported by Mike Fleming, one of the old stalwarts. I mean, when Mike Fleming speaks, he's like the E.F. Hutton of the entertainment business. You can listen. Mike Fleming said today at 5 a.m., on Deadline, Netflix licenses from Paramount rights to make Beverly Hills Cop sequel with Eddie Murphy and Jerry Bruckheimer. They have been trying to make Beverly Hills Cop 4 forever. As everyone knows, there was well, you might not know, there was a Beverly Hills Cop TV pilot shot that did not get picked up. So they've been trying to revive this franchise. The last one, well, let me read. Exclusive, Beverly Hills Cop Axel Foley will come back to active duty for Netflix. Paramount has made a one-time license deal with an option for a sequel that will enable Netflix to make the fourth installment of the film with Eddie Murphy and producer Jerry Bruckheimer. The studio had been developing a reboot for a while. It is another example of studios striking incentive deals with Netflix at a time when long gestating sequels like The Shining follow-up Dr. Sleep, The Terminator Dark Fate, and Zombieland Double Tap have been hard-pressed to measure up to the grosses of their predecessors, with at least two of them in line to lose money because of the high cost of P&A. For those of you who don't know, prints and advertising, mostly advertising. P&A advertising is something that frequently exceeds the budget of the actual film that it is advertising. Because remember, we are now working in a global landscape. If you have made a film or content especially with the amount of content there is. It doesn't matter if you've made Gone with the Wind 2 or something. It doesn't matter how good a movie is. If nobody knows it's playing, nobody will turn out to see it, and you will not receive a return on your investment. But I'll get to that in a minute. This deal gives Netflix a sexy title with a big star, and it gives Paramount an opportunity to reap revenue on a library title. Paramount launched the franchise in 1984 with the Martin Brest-directed original, followed by a Tony Scott-directed second installment in 87, and a third by John Landis in 1994. This is the third deal between Paramount and Netflix after the streamer acquired Cloverfield God Particle. It was called God Particle originally, which launched with a surprise Super Bowl spot and the release after the 2018 game, and it acquired offshore rights to the Alex Garland-directed Annihilation with Natalie Portman 17 days after its U.S. release by Paramount. Netflix, for those of you who don't know this, Netflix made a similar deal with New Line when it took foreign rights on last year's Shaft. That's right. The Shaft movie that had Richard Roundtree and Sam Jackson in it it debuted theatrically here, but around the rest of the world, Netflix had taken it. All those deals were for finished films. Netflix will work with Murphy and Bruckheimer to get a script and a director and finance the Beverly Hills Cop reboot and release it on the streaming service. It strengthens Netflix's relationship with Murphy. Netflix's hot new movie title, Murphy starring in the critically lauded Dolomite Is My Name, playing self-made blaxploitation star Rudy Ray Moore. Murphy has also been in discussions to return to the stand-up stage for Netflix for the first time since the 1980s, when he catapulted from Saturday Night Live to become one of the world's biggest movie stars and stand-up stage stars. Raw and Delirious, man. Two of the greatest stand-up shows I've ever seen. Paramount, in turn, has Murphy starring in another sequel to one of his beloved characters, Prince Akeem, in Coming to America, which comes out, I believe, next. Is it December 18th? December 20th? I think it's December 18th of 2020. Paramount has attempted numerous iterations of Beverly Hills Cop over the past few years, including an attempted TV series that Murphy was going to star in, but which never quite made it to the start line. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, why did I choose to read all of these articles together? Well, they're all pretty exciting, and I think it points the direction to where we are heading in the future now that the streaming wars have. And I think that there's another article I wanted to read too, but I didn't want to cross the streams. But for those of you who don't know, every year, well, first of all, before I get off the subject, one of the great things about Netflix making a movie like Beverly Hills Cop, and everybody says, well, why wouldn't you Beverly Hills Cop, the first two movies were hugely profitable. In this new landscape, one of the advantages of filmmakers and now studios to make movies for a third party, such as a Netflix, is you do not have to pay for advertising, and you do not P&A. The marketing costs are not your problem. What you're doing is you're working in partnership. In this case, they're talking about actually developing the movie, developing the script, hiring the director together. And so it mitigates. Hollywood's always about risk mitigation. You mitigate the risk because you don't have to invest. In the case of Beverly Hills Cop, I would imagine they'll keep the costs down because it shouldn't be a $150 million movie, especially where Eddie Murphy is in his career. But it's highly attractive for Paramount to take a fee. They'll probably make quite a bit of money off of this, but they're also probably partnering up with Netflix. Netflix might take whatever I don't know what the monetary deal is, but for Paramount that's struggling to come back to get to where it used to be a dominant member. I mean, the 80s and the 90s, Paramount was killing it. They haven't killed it for a long time. And this, I think, is an incredibly shrewd move on the part of the studio because they can bring back a franchise and their risk is mitigated. Everybody's going to come out right if it works. By the way, it couldn't be worse than Beverly Hills Cop 3, right? Now, what I really love about this is a star like Eddie Murphy could have come back and tried to shoot for the moon. But instead, and he's been on this comeback trail, he made Dolomite Is My Name for Netflix. That was a very personal project for him that he wanted to make for a long time. and he wanted to star as Rudy Ray Moore, who he knew before Rudy Ray Moore's death. He partnered up with director Craig Brewer, and they had such a good experience making Dolomite Is My Name that Craig Brewer went on to direct Coming to America 2 for Paramount. So for Eddie Murphy to then partner up with Paramount to bring back Beverly Hills Cop, and another thing about Beverly Hills Cop 4, I can't even imagine when you're making a movie that doesn't get made, you are accumulating costs against that project. So let's say Beverly Hills Cop 4, they've been trying to develop it. How many scripts have been written? They might have paid literally tens of millions of dollars to try and get Beverly Hills Cop 4 made. Now, all of that money is considered development money. And when a Beverly Hills Cop 4 is made, that money gets rolled into the budget because they have to pay themselves back for all that work that was done. That's why Star Trek The Motion Picture had a cost of $44 million. You had the development of Philip Kaufman's Planet of the Titans movie. You had the development for the Star Trek Phase 2 series, which they had commissioned scripts for. They built sets for. They were moving ahead, building miniatures. All of that was scrapped when they started to make Star Trek The Motion Picture. So you had all of those previous years' worth of development costs rolled in to the budget of Star Trek The Motion Picture, which is why at the time it was one of the most expensive movies ever made. Well, the same is true of Beverly Hills Cop 4. There's a lot of money already against that movie. So I don't know how much, but let's just say for the sake of argument, $10 million. The movie has already got a budget of $10 million before you even have a script or a director, because that's what they've spent trying to get this off the ground, much less what they ever did for the TV pilot. So who knows? So the movie is not inexpensive. And there's a lot of people would just say, yeah, it's not worth it to make a Beverly Hills Cop 4 when we already have a $10 million upfront cost that we need to absorb or take care of. But anyway, what's really interesting about all this is I see that it's great synergy, and it shows how good business is being done in the entertainment business in our new age of streaming. Paramount is an ailing studio. Giannopoulos is trying to bring it back. He's starting small. Again, you're not swinging for the fences. They're not going out and going, we're going to start a cinematic universe that's going to make us billions of dollars. No, they know they can't do that. So they're doing very, very smart business. You build slow. You create an alliance with Netflix, a third-party vendor. You bring back a license that you already own. You've got a star that had been dormant for a long time who's now coming back. Netflix is developing a relationship outside of Paramount. And then Paramount also, they've got a relationship with that same star with Coming to America. So it makes sense that Netflix and Paramount would come together, Eddie Murphy being the fulcrum between the two, and making Beverly Hills Cop 4. And this, to me, is good business. This is the future of the world when it comes to the streaming wars. And it's very interesting when Ted Sarandos was making these comments about how he's not worried about Disney. What's really interesting about Disney, and what I think cannot be understated, is that Disney has something all of these other streaming services do not. They have a built-in family audience from the get. And so Disney, if you're paying for a Disney streaming service and you're a family and you have children, you're always going to get Disney Plus. It's all right there. So they actually, of all the streaming services, they've got probably the strongest foundation with which to build on. Now, the thing is, Disney also has Star Wars, it has Marvel, but it's not going to be making that. They're certainly not going to be spending as much money on content as, say, Netflix. Even HBO Max recently said they're going to cap their year's spending on content at something like $2 billion, which might seem like a lot until you really start calculating how much things cost. It's really not that much money. But on the other hand, it's reassuring to know, at least from my perspective, to see that Netflix is teaming up with a star of Murphy's caliber who is starting small. Again, Paramount's rebuilding. Murphy is rebuilding his career. Netflix, as Ted Sarandos was talking about, sees their future in original content. And they're doing that. And I think it's good business for everybody. Netflix is, of course, leveraged to the hilt. They're massively in debt because they've borrowed a lot of money. They're banking on their streaming platform to continue with subscribers, gaining more subscribers. I mean, 250 million in America alone, or maybe it was worldwide, but still, I like seeing the entertainment business like this doing what I consider to be decent business. It bodes well, I think, for the future. And for anybody like myself who's still trying to eke out a meager living, I mean, to be honest with you, we have Tango Shalom, which I've got some information. If you're LA based, I'll just announce it. On December 18th, we are going to be screening Tango Shalom for the very first time in its basically finished form. And I'm going to give away 2 tickets for Tango Shalom on this show. Now, it's in the morning. It's on the 18th of December. And it's going to be exciting. It's the first time the film will ever be shown finished in any form anywhere. And yeah, but you have to be LA based. I mean, unless you want to fly in if you win, but I don't think anybody would. But anyway, you know, we'll definitely, I'm going to give away 2 tickets and take whoever gets those, or whoever wants to be there. I'm going to take you guys out to lunch, and we'll have a chat. Anyway, that's coming up. So stay tuned for details about that. But I certainly would like to get Tango Shalom onto a streaming service, you know, whether it's Apple, whether it's Netflix, whether it's Disney. I mean, it could be a Disney film. It doesn't have it's definitely a family film. As I said, Tango Shalom is a indie Jewish spiritual quest family dance comedy fable. So it could go on any streaming service. But what's really great in my mind is to see this kind of business being done. I'm very excited. I think we're going to see more of that. Going back in and looking at franchises that have laid fallow for a long time. I mean, not that I would advocate this, but what if there was a Godfather TV series? I mean, as long as Francis Ford Coppola was involved, I think that might be pretty cool. But anyway, all of this is very unique. It's really interesting to watch. I find, as a student, not just of cinema itself, but of the business of Hollywood, I find this reassuring. I like seeing this kind of thing happen. I hope it all works out. And if I might make a guess, I think Craig Brewer will probably end up directing Beverly Hills Cop 4. That's what I would imagine, assuming Paramount is happy with Coming to America 2. Craig Brewer would be then the third film, his triptych. Third time's the charm, maybe, even though My Name is Dolomite is my name, and Coming to America 2. I'm sure those are great, and I would not be surprised if Craig Brewer directs Beverly Hills Cop 4. But anyway, all very exciting, which brings me to something else that's along the same line. Speaking of Paramount, Stubble McShave, our own Stubble McShave, loquacious Stubble McShave. I mean, he doesn't talk a lot, but he writes a lot. I love this. As many people know, The Godfather 1 and 2 are probably my favorite movies of all time for a number of different reasons. But Stubble McShave weighs in with this letter all the way from Sweden. Hi, Rob. A while back, I admitted to a significant gap in which classic movies I hadn't watched. In a super chat, I told you that I had never watched the Godfather trilogy, although I had owned it on Blu-ray for the last 2 years. And I admitted, I have to say, before I watched The Godfather, Godfather 3 hadn't been made yet, but I owned Godfather 1 and 2 on Laserdisc for a couple of years before I ever watched them. I know, terrifying. And when I watched them in prep for the release of Godfather 3, which I was going to see with my friend Wayne Mogilevsky on Christmas Day. And I watched them. I was so blown away by them. I continued to watch them. I think I watched each one like 4 times in the week leading up to the release of Godfather 3. It was Christmas of 1990. You were mildly horrified by that and told me that I had to watch it at once. Well, I did watch it soon after, and I realized that I had seen the first movie earlier when I was around 10 years old. I remembered some significant scenes. If you read this on the channel, it would be, when have I not read one of your letters on the channel? If you read this on the channel, this would be a good point to tell the viewers and listeners that there will be some spoilers for the Godfather movies in this letter. You know what? I'm gonna allow it. If you haven't seen The Godfather, what are you waiting for? But so go away now. But come on. One of the scenes I remembered was the scene where Sonny gets killed. I guess that when you're 10 years old, those are the scenes that stick in your mind. I'm now the age of 42, and being the answer of life, the universe, and everything, according to Douglas Adams, I have a different appreciation for these movies. In part, I write this letter because I feel a need to discuss these movies. These are movies that have certain themes which one wants to discuss and which makes you think on the nature of man. And when I say nature of man, that can be taken literally because there are movies about men and women these are movies about men and women have very small roles in these movies, as they also had in the society that is depicted. Yes, but they have important roles. The themes that I locked onto in these movies are family, loyalty, leadership, and morals. If you look at family, we really see the destruction of the family structure, from a very loving family with a lot of respect and love for one another to a complete destruction of the family unit. The reason for the destruction of the family is mostly because of leadership. That brings me to Michael. In the beginning, he seemed to be a good guy, but we come to learn that he's more or less a sociopath. He has no passion for anything but himself and his own standing in the world, and by proxy, the reputation of his family. In the beginning, he plans to stay out. I have a different take on that, by the way, but I'll get to that. In the beginning, he plans to stay out of the family business. The cynic in me thinks that's because he's the youngest brother, and initially, there's no future of importance for him in the family, so he sets out to find his own way in life. This changes when he saves his father from a planned attack by the other mafia families and subsequently gets his jaw broken by police captain McCluskey. He gets pulled into the family affairs when he agrees to take out the rival mafia leader and the police captain. I think the reason he does that is not because of love for family, although that may have been a part of it. I think the main reason is to get back at the police captain who hit him. Okay, Stubble, I got to say, I have a completely different reading of Michael Corleone and The Godfather up to this point. And I want to differ. I beg to differ with you, sir. I think that Michael Corleone was kept outside of the family business because that was the wishes of his father. His father desperately wanted to take the family legitimate at some point, and he saw that Michael was, aside from Sonny, who was too hot-headed, and Fredo, who wasn't smart enough, he saw Michael Corleone as somebody, Michael, his own son, would be somebody that could work and become a civilian and facilitate the family moving away from a life of crime and into more of a civilian line of work, more legitimate. And I think that Michael Corleone knew this about his father and took it upon himself to complete his father's wishes. At least that's the way I've always read it. I don't think it was necessarily selfish, but the difference is Michael did not have Vito's heart. It wasn't that he was heartless, but he was somebody that used logic and what he knew as opposed to the love that was sort of inherent in Italian family tradition. Because he wasn't native born, he was obviously the son. Vito was a first-generation immigrant, but Michael grew up in New York City, and his family intentionally kept him away from the family business to keep him pure as the driven snow, so to speak. He knew all about his family. He knew everything that went on, but he tried to stay legitimate. And I think what happened, what Michael Corleone realized, is that he was drawn into that web of, well, mafia intrigue, and he realized he was the one that had to step up. He was the one that had to save his family because he knew that if he didn't, neither Fredo nor Sonny could step up and do what needed to be done. Now, I don't think he thought that at first, but it was something that became readily apparent to him as things went along. And remember, his father did get better, and throughout the rest of The Godfather, when an ailing Vito grows older, passed along all of the knowledge to his son. So I don't think necessarily it was selfish at first. I think the problem with Michael Corleone was he was consumed by, he didn't have the heart that Vito had, so he couldn't lead with Vito's heart. He led by logic and by cold ruthlessness. And in doing so, he ended up losing his soul. But anyway, that's just me. If you look at Michael and Sonny, you'll notice they are polar opposites. Sonny's a passionate man who does things without thinking and loves the family. Michael, as I said, is more or less a sociopath who has very little passion in life and is only out to advance his own agenda. See, I just don't agree with that. If you compare Michael to Vito, I'd say Vito is the perfect leader. Vito can read a situation perfectly and knows what to do in any given situation. Unlike Michael, he's got a lot of empathy for the people around him. Yes, he has a heart, a big heart. Another difference between Vito and Michael is that Vito has the loyalty of the people around him because they love and respect him. Michael has the loyalty of people because they either fear him or they loved his father. I totally agree with that, but they learned to fear him. Michael never really earns anyone's respect. He demands it. Very true. One can only wonder how the other two sons, Sonny and Fredo, would have handled the leadership of leading the family. I think Sonny would have crashed and burned because of his carelessness and his hot-headedness. Fredo didn't have the backbone or stones for running the family. He would have caved at the first sign of pressure. I think the best person to take over would have been Tom Hagen, Duvall's character. I think the strongest example of family and loyalty is the courtroom scene where, I can't remember his name, are going to testify against Michael, but changes his testimony when he sees his brother, knowing that the deal with the feds is toast. Another interesting scene is when Vito arrives as a child to the U.S. and has to go through customs. It makes me think of the refugees of today and reminds us that it wasn't long ago that the ancestors of today's citizens of the U.S. stood in similar lines hoping to get into America and find a better life for themselves or tried to escape certain death at home, just like Vito did. I feel most sad for Kay. She became trapped in a life where she had no power and was basically a prisoner under Michael. The question is, if not Michael's big love... The question is if not Michael's big love died in Sicily and Kay was merely there to fulfill the role of securing the family line for Michael. She was. That's exactly what happened. I must say that there are stellar performances by Brando, Pacino, and De Niro, as well as several others, and I can't say who did it best. A mouse could starve on the difference. Anyway, those are my initial thoughts after seeing the Godfather trilogy, and I primarily talked about the first two movies. I'm certain there's been essays written about these movies because I felt the need to talk about them after I watched them. What are your thoughts on the Godfather movies? Thanks, Stubble. P.S. I just realized that I probably used a Wheel of Time in-world saying with a mouse could starve on the difference because I don't think it needs explanation, and I won't change it into something else because that phrase was what I was thinking when I wrote it. By the way, I know what that means. A mouth could starve on the difference. I love that, meaning there is no difference. Very good. I like that. But, Stubble, these movies are some of my favorite movies, really, and I see something different in them. And what's really interesting about what I love about the Godfather films is Mario Puzo's novel is not that great of a novel. And when they put it into production, that Coppola was really given free rein to do what he wanted. He rewrote the whole thing, and he really, as he said in his own words, he decided to make the Godfather movie more universal, and he saw Vito as a king of the realm, and it was about all of his three sons and the whole idea of succession and the land. I mean, the New York of the 1940s and then later 50s and later 70s in Godfather 3. The land of New York is a realm because it's not like you see outside a little bit like when Michael and Kay go shopping, but mostly you're in this insular world of the mafia, and it on a broader context it isn't just about the mafia. It's really, like you said, it's about family, it's about loyalty, it's about love and succession and sons and fathers and mothers, because I think Vito's I think the whole Corleone family, the mother, Mama Corleone is a part of it. She's just there, but I know that the women don't have a big part to play, but Kay certainly does. Kay is the one person that can defy Michael and get away with it because she is the mother of his children. And I think that is an astonishing bit in those films. And I think one of the great things, I love Godfather 3. Is Godfather 3 the genius filmmaking or the genius film of Godfather 1 and 2? Certainly not. But I do love Godfather 3. I think it's a very worthy, respectable movie. Is it beyond criticism? Certainly not. But I do love the movie and what it has to say. And I think the relationship between Kay and Michael is handled beautifully. But since you didn't talk about Godfather 3, I won't get into it. But I love the two films. I think it's beautiful filmmaking. Nowadays, it's funny whenever somebody today goes back, somebody discovers Godfather. I think you're a little older. You said you're 42 now, so you know the answer to life, or you are the answer to life, the universe, and everything. But when younger viewers, specifically viewers that are either getting into watching movies, and you've already seen Goodfellas, and you've already seen The Sopranos, and you've already seen so many movies about the mafia, when you go back and you watch The Godfather now, you think you're going to be seeing this revelatory bit of cinema that's going to be the greatest thing in the world, when really it requires a lot of attention. It's a very thoughtful film, and it requires you need to bring in. It's an intellectual film, and it doesn't have the easy joy of, say, a movie like Casino or Goodfellas. Even though I think that Casino and Goodfellas are movies that you should definitely watch especially after you've seen The Godfather. Watching Casino makes a lot more sense. So in a way, if you watch Godfather 1 and 2, and then watch, say, Goodfellas and Casino, and then watch Godfather 3, it's interesting, even though Casino and it's just the same milieu, but it's like, well, they're all Westerns, but they're about the mafia. It's an interesting way. I just love the movies. I never get tired of those films. I could watch them over and over and over again. Well, somebody sent in a super chat and deleted the message. That's always cryptic. I always feel like, what did I do? What did I do? Timbulus Spider Monkey's here. Tim is here. It's taken me a few days to get over, but well done to Wilson and the boys for their victory over my 49ers. Still happy with our form this year. Look, man, anybody could have won that game. 49ers could have won that game. I mean, they were one kick away from winning. But what I really thought, the best thing about that game, it was on Monday Night Football, and whether you're a casual football fan or a diehard football fan, that was one of the craziest, most exciting football games I've certainly ever seen in my life. I mean, it went literally all the way down to the last 4 seconds in overtime. It was unbelievable. Talk about a battle on the gridiron. There have been movies that are far less exciting than that football game was. I think everybody acquitted themselves admirably. It was fantastic, and I look forward to the 49ers and the Seahawks meeting again, because, wow, what a game that's going to be. Factual Opinion is here, and Factual Opinion says, I'm a Damon Lindelof fan, so I'm enjoying Watchmen. Well, I mean, you do have Dr. Manhattan's logo right there. I understand. Watchmen, I have to say, I am enjoying watching it. I can't decide whether it's a whole lot of hooey. It's so self-important. I mean, somebody might say that the comic book was self-important too, but I certainly didn't. I still, like I've described it to people, I still feel like with Watchmen, I feel like I'm a junior, and I'm in newspaper. I was in my newspaper class. I wrote for my high school newspaper, and there were people that were seniors that were also part of the drama club, and I thought the drama clubbers in my high school, like I love drama, and I was in plays in junior high school, but in high school, the drama club, they were the most pretentious people in my high school. I couldn't abide them. They were so self-important and took themselves so seriously. I feel that everybody in Watchmen, I can't even imagine what it would be like to hang out with the writing staff of Watchmen. I would probably want literally to pull out my teeth with pliers after about 5 minutes. At least that's how I imagine it. Because I can't imagine a show that, first of all, the fact that you're making a sequel to the Watchmen comic is already just the height of hubris, but also what you're doing is, it's basically every scene in the movie is like, look at how cool and creative we are. Now, that's fine. When I see something that's great, and I think to myself, people are so cool and creative, but that's something that the audience should come to a conclusion. The audience should draw that conclusion about you. You shouldn't be reminding the audience in every scene, look at how cool and creative and awesome we are. That's how I feel like when I'm watching Watchmen. I'm like, okay, aren't you guys like, my God, that's why I can't decide whether this is the most pretentious show I've ever seen, or it's an incredibly well done sequel to Watchmen. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's neither. This episode will be beyond the halfway point. The upcoming episode will be episode 5. I mean, the last episode was called if you don't like this story, write your own or something. I mean, there's so much craziness going on that I don't necessarily think it's anyway. But I will say this, as you are, factual opinion, I am enjoying it for now. Comic John says, Rob, do you ever watch John Campea's show if you're not on? I don't. I really don't, because usually if I'm not on John's show, I am doing something else work related. Like this morning, I did an interview with a gentleman named Harry Sidney, who was he was on the San Francisco 49ers back in the late 80s, early 90s, and then he was on the Green Bay Packers, and he later became a coach and started a men's mentorship program in 2003 called My Brother's Keeper. So this morning, while John was on, I was interviewing him for another episode that I'll be putting together of Living the Lucky Tiger Life. Fascinating interview. So usually when I'm not on John's show, it's either because one, I can't come because I'm doing something else, or I've just got work to do because I've got many different irons in the fire. There's so many different things that I need to be doing. So I usually don't. And unless something goes down that's funny, I'll watch the clips later, but I don't usually watch the show when I'm not on. Willow Yang says, how old do you think Arthur is? If they make a Joker sequel, I don't know if I want to see an adult Batman getting into fisticuffs with a senior. Well, Willow Yang, a lot of people have said that, and I agree with you. I don't know if they could make a Batman movie with Arthur Fleck. I don't know. But, I mean, they could get away, like a 20-year age difference. If Joker's more of a megalomaniac crime boss, maybe they could work it out. I mean, if the young Bruce that we saw was, say, 10, and you say that Arthur Fleck, maybe there's a 25-year difference, and you made that Joker more of a mastermind as opposed to, somebody that they fight, it could work, but I don't know. Mark Jure is here. Mark C says, I see Paramount and Sony partnering with Netflix. This would give both studios a streaming platform and keep Netflix relevant. I can see that too. I mean, as you know, as I just read, Paramount, this is the third time after the last Cloverfield film and Annihilation that Paramount is partnering up with Netflix. And this is the first time they're bringing out what could be another entry. I mean, Beverly Hills Cop is one of my favorite. I think it's one of the best action comedies ever made. It's an incredible hybrid of both an action film and a comedy. It works really, really well. And if you haven't seen Beverly Hills Cop in a long time, go back and watch it, because the opening scene, the neutron dance, it's pretty amazing. The car chase scene, it's got peak verisimilitude. It's a great action sequence, and yet it's also funny. Anthony Gonzalez says, how would a 2 versus 2 battle between the USS Enterprise and the USS Reliant versus the USS Excelsior and the USS Grissom goes? Who wins? I'm a geek and unapologetic. Gilbert is here barking. I have to tell you, I think the Grissom and the Enterprise, the Grissom would get taken out early. It's a science vessel. It really can't defend itself. It was not really meant for combat. The Excelsior, being larger, could be. It depends about its complement of photon torpedoes and phasers. But I think between the Enterprise and the Reliant, they would make quick work of the Excelsior. Well, maybe not quick work. It also depends who's captaining the ship. We shall see. But it's an interesting. I love these questions, so don't ever hesitate to ask them. Brad Gray says, hey, Rob, longtime viewer. Appreciate you, your insight, and your channel. Any idea if the new Mandalorian will be available at midnight Eastern Standard Time? Thanks. Well, Brad, that is a very good question. As many people know, the second episode of The Mandalorian goes live tomorrow, or as Brad is asking, at midnight. I would imagine that they're probably going to follow. Look, The Mandalorian dropped early on the night of the 11th. I mean, it was available, about 11 o'clock my time. I would imagine you will be seeing The Mandalorian tonight, probably, let's say at 12:01. That's what they'll probably follow, the Netflix model, but maybe not. I don't know. I look forward to watching it, though. I think I've told people that I think what we saw with the first episode of Mandalorian was the proof of concept. They were showing how new technology could be employed. Dave Filoni was directing. That's why it felt like an animated episode. My only criticism, and I don't think The Mandalorian was badly directed, but I think it was directed very simplistically, which is fine because Star Wars, the first Star Wars, it had a feel, you're looking back at old Westerns. We don't need flashy editing, but I think it was really, you could tell that Filoni was getting his sea legs, as it were, directing. I think the real proof in terms of the pudding of this souffle is definitely the pudding of, does that work? Is going to be this second episode. I'm really excited because I think they made this second episode probably a little while after the first episode, because that's what you do with a TV pilot. And I don't think that Kathleen Kennedy would just be like, sure, let's greenlight another $150 million to go make more Star Wars. She needed to have this proven to her, and rightfully so. So I think what we're going to see in this second episode is going to be a lot more telling. I would imagine the second episode is probably going to be a lot more impressive. But we'll see. I'll be curious. But yes, I think probably it's going to drop around midnight tonight. Definitely. So we'll see. Matthew DeFritas says, I don't know you. I don't know you. Oh, I don't know you, but I wanted to say that your work here and on the John Campea show, you seem like a good person, and I appreciate your insight on the entertainment industry. Thanks. Well, that's very nice of you to say, Matthew. I really appreciate that. I will say this, that my whole life I've wanted to make movies and work in the entertainment business. And I've had, as I've talked a lot about on this show, I've had so many opportunities and I've had so much fun that I still, even after working for 30 years on and off in the entertainment business, and well, mostly on, but I've never had great commercial success. I've never really broken through. I've made things that have made money, but I personally, I don't command any power. I'm always, I'm scrapping around and rummaging around for the next opportunity, but I genuinely still love it. I love Hollywood. I love the business of Hollywood, even though the business can suck, but I also love all the byproducts of it all. I think it's great, and I'm still having a good time. So I very much appreciate that, and I hope to keep having a good time, even though I've had some pretty big setbacks. One day I'm going to write my book. I haven't talked a lot about my setbacks. I should probably do a few shows about some of the bad things that have happened to me. One day I want to do a show when I'm in the garage on my new set. I'm going to have Carrie David, who made a documentary called Breaking Their Silence, on, and we're going to talk about our experience making Agent Cody Banks, which is a story unto itself. But I very much appreciate you saying that. Brad Gray is here. Brad Gray says, YouTube gave me a few $5 free super chats. So here, have another. I have spoken. Well, thank you, Brad. I appreciate that super chat. The channel appreciates you. Everybody appreciates that. And I very much appreciate the support. This letter, this is interesting. This one came in. This comes from Tim Salmons, who writes great articles for the Digital Bits website. If you haven't caught up with the Digital Bits, it's a physical media website that my good buddy Bill Hunt has been presiding over for over 20 years now. Bill Hunt also has written his first science fiction novel called Only Those Who Risk, which is fantastic. I want to read the whole series. He's shopping for a publisher, and it's a great book. And if you like things like The Expanse, you'll love Only Those Who Risk. But this comes from Tim Salmons. Hello, Rob. I was listening to one of your recent shows where you talked about The Shining and Dr. Sleep and the latter's failure to connect with audiences and make money for the studio. My thoughts on this are fairly succinct, so I won't dilly-dally around. In my estimation, there are 4 reasons why Dr. Sleep didn't bring in audiences. First of all, The Shining, as you correctly pointed out, is old, plain and simple. Despite our geeky collective love of the book and the original Kubrick film, the less said about the Mick Garris TV miniseries, the better. Newer generations likely have no familiarity with them. Sure, fans of Stephen King are bound to go out and see it, particularly those in their late 30s and beyond, but younger people probably don't care. Sad to say, and this is the cold, hard truth, most younger viewers aren't watching many films made before the 1980s, which is unfortunate to say the least. After all, there's so much new content to devour. Why should they? Second, Dr. Sleep as a book is just too new a property. While many studios have adapted brand new books, hell, Ridley Scott's Hannibal was in development before Thomas Harris had even finished writing it. Dr. Sleep has barely been in existence. Well, and let's be honest, did it really light the world on fire or get tongues wagging once it was released? I can say no. You say no. It wasn't a part of popular culture, nor did it have any kind of mass following. It is a minor reason, I grant you, but still a part of the equation. Look, I agree with you, Tim. Dr. Sleep came out. It's a sequel to The Shining. I didn't know anybody who read it, to be honest. Third, which ties in my first point, the advertising material relied too heavily on our prior knowledge of The Shining. It was fine to lean into it, but for me, there was no sense of understanding what it was actually about. It said too little, and therefore, folks who aren't familiar with The Shining or the Dr. Sleep novel weren't interested. Fourth, and finally, partly while Dr. Sleep didn't do too well, was because Stephen King's name wasn't on it. Back in the day, his name was above nearly every adaptation of one of his books. Stephen King's It, Stephen King's The Stand, Stephen King's Needful Things, etc. By the way, I like the Needful Things movie more than a lot of people. At some point, that was no longer a viable marketing tool to sell a movie. So when they remade It, they titled it simply It. By that time, the Pennywise character was part of popular culture, and also scary clowns were a trend. The Dark Tower and Gerald's Game adaptations also lacked his name as well. Sure, the marketing materials for these things mention they're based upon works by Stephen King, but back in the day, his name above the title gave you an idea of what to expect, and therefore had added cash value. Perhaps he contractually no longer wants that to happen in fear of what occurred with films like The Shining and The Lawnmower Man, which I fondly remember the VHS trailer for when it was called Stephen King's The Lawnmower Man, before he sued to have that changed. Either way, the absence of his name didn't do Dr. Sleep any favors. Those are just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours. All the best, Tim Salmon. Well, Tim, I'm right there with you, buddy, 100%. I think you're right. You know, books. In this day and age, like, I'm a huge fan of books. I'm always buying books. There's too many books to buy. There's too many books I want to read. And I'm still not done. I mean, normally I read the new Joe Ledger novel in a day, Jonathan Mayberry's Joe Ledger books, but I haven't been because I've been sort of scattered doing a bunch of different things, although I'm halfway through it. It's very good. I mean, I like all those books. But I think you're right. Stephen King has ebbed and flowed. His popularity has ebbed and flowed. Remember, after he had his car accident, actually was hit, he wasn't going to write ever again. He retired, and then he's come back. And we are living right now in the middle of a Stephen King renaissance, whether people know it or not. HBO has its prestige series, The Outsider, coming. We have Mr. Mercedes on, and The Outsider is actually a spinoff from the Mr. Mercedes universe, which I wonder about what is the legalities of that. But you've got that. You have It was burning up the box office charts. You've got In the Tall Grass, Vincent Natalia's new film that was based on a Joe Hill and Stephen King collaboration. So there's tons of Stephen King going on. But I have to tell you, I think, again, like the original Shining, Stephen King has been writing books. I mean, we're talking Carrie. When did, actually, Brian De Palma's Carrie, I want to say Carrie came out in 1976, but it might have come out in 1975. I want to say 76. Let's see. Carrie came out 76. That was the movie. The cinematic adaptation of Stephen King's first mass market novel, Carrie, came out in 1976. Carrie is older than Star Wars. So you're looking at 43 years ago, the first Stephen King adaptation came out. And then if you look, like the 70s, you did have The Shining, of course, come out in 80. There was the Salem's Lot miniseries, well, the 2-night event, which, Mark, open the window. I mean, The Dead Zone, Carpenter did Christine. Stephen King has been a household name, but his bankability has come and gone. And like you said, you know, when Shawshank Redemption came out, nobody put Stephen King's name on Shawshank Redemption. On Stand By Me, which is, again, we talked about a couple days ago, Stand By Me, no one knew that was based on a Stephen King story either. So it's true. I think you're right. People don't know. And also, Stephen King, do younger audiences, are they out there clamoring? If you're 25 years old and you're clamoring on a Friday night to go out with your girlfriend to do something, our audiences and our young people, do they care about Stephen King? I mean, we live in a world where people love the Conjuring franchise. They love the Insidious franchise. They love the spin-offs from the Conjuring franchise, whether it's Annabelle or The Nun or whatever. I mean, who's going to go see a Happy Death Day to You? Is Stephen King still viable as far as young people go? I question it. I don't know. And I think you're right. I think they just like with Blade Runner 2049. Blade Runner 2049 was a sequel to a movie that was made in 1982, and it's a cult film at best that didn't do well. So I think it's really interesting. I think your reasoning is spot on, and I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you why the movie didn't do well. But what's funny is you'd think people would know this. Like Dr. Sleep needed to, I think, as you pointed out, and I was talking about this a couple days ago, Dr. Sleep needed to live on its own. They should not have leaned so heavily into the fact that it was a direct sequel to the Shining movie, and that it was a Stephen King novel that, by the way, didn't burn up the charts. So it was a weird hybrid, and the idea, it's strange to me that we saw what Spielberg did with Shining and Ready Player One, which I thought was actually pretty clever, which was a departure from the book, and then seeing Dr. Sleep wind up being an actual sequel to a Warner Brothers film, which was The Shining from 1980. It was very interesting. The whole thing was a very interesting thing, but obviously it didn't work at the box office, even though the tracking was pretty good. I just think it really lost its younger audience, which is, in a way, sort of definitely a bummer. But I thought your analysis was spot on. And I think as they go back and resurrect more and more of these older properties, I was a huge fan of British writer James Herbert. James Herbert wrote some really violent and sexually explicit novels that I read when I was a kid. I talked about these a long time ago on the show, but movies like The Fog, which is no relation to John Carpenter's movie, or The Dark, or The Survivor, or The Rats. I first came across James Herbert reading The Rats at the Flying Horseshoe Ranch when I went to summer camp when I was a kid. It was great because there's nothing better in summer camp than sexually explicit and horribly violent horror novels, and you could read them aloud. My favorite was when I read the prologue aloud to my cabin of Robert McCammon's, one of my dream projects. If I could make, here, somebody can go steal this. If I could make anything, I would make Robert McCammon's They Thirst, which is an epic vampire novel that came out in 1981. You should read it. But I just read that they're making James Herbert's Shrine into, I guess, a movie or a series or something. I was like, wow, they're going back. That book came out in 1983, so good on them. Anyway, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't think James Herbert has really any kind of a footprint that you can market, but what do you know? Speaking of Blade Runner, here's another letter that I particularly enjoyed. This letter comes from Paul Hoy. I love this one. Greetings, Rob. Thanks for reading my letter on ROBServations number 270. If you recall, mine was the upbringing that did not include Jerry Anderson's UFO. Oh, I know, and I've been crying for you ever since. In my defense, growing up, I don't think it ever aired in Vancouver. As a kid, I scoured that TV guide religiously, and a show called UFO would have stood out. Oh, remember Project UFO? Psh, of course you do. I love Project UFO. I also love Project UFO because all the UFOs that they showed in that show, I could tell you which model kits were used to make the flying saucers. It's true. Subsequently, I heard your preference for the original theatrical release of Blade Runner. Agreed. I'm glad you also see the character of Rick Deckard as human and not a replicant. A while ago, I was surprised I had to debate that subject with a close friend. He's now dead to me. Ha! I kid, mostly. I mean, it's poignant to question your own humanity, but so Shyamalan when it turns out you're an android. Just kidding, M. Night. Big fan. From a practical argument, if Deckard was a replicant, he wouldn't have been on a more wouldn't he would have been on a more equal footing when confronted with each target. Zora was dispatching him easily until someone entering the room interrupted her. He was defenseless against Leon, and he was about to die when Rachel intervened. Even Pris was about to defeat him, but chose a more elaborate way of finishing him off, giving Deckard 1 second to retrieve his gun. Still, not bad for your basic pleasure model. And of course, Roy Batty, even as his body was shutting down, was toying with Deckard, but ultimately decided to spare him. Actually, Deckard was pretty lucky for a human. Use best Lance Henriksen voice. If it was really Scott's intent to suggest Rick Deckard was a replicant, he could have done a better job of it. And I'm a big fan, Mr. Scott. Good heavens, Martin Landau and Neil Patrick Harris at the Playboy Mansion. What's next? A donkey and a honeycomb? Scandalous. Rob, I pray to get closure on that anecdote one day. L'chaim, Paul H. Well, Paul H., you and I definitely park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. I think Blade Runner loses a lot of its power if Deckard is a replicant. I think Ridley Scott was retconning his own movie. I'm sure he heard somebody say that to him once, and he was really compelled by that argument and decided to adopt it as its own. I don't think Blade Runner makes sense if Deckard is not a human being. I think the whole point and the reason the movie works for me so much, the reason I think it works for a lot of people, is that the audience, we are Rick Deckard. We, the audience, when we hear Roy Batty's speech at the end, everybody is sad. Everybody realizes, I mean, there's a great turn there when you see Roy Batty being this evil character the whole movie, and then you realize at the end, whether you saw the I Want More Life father or the I Want More Life fucker version of Blade Runner, and there are both, you sympathize with him, and that's part of being human. And I think that's one of the reasons that movie works is not just the vision of Blade Runner. Look, I've never been one. I do not worship at the altar of Blade Runner. I think Blade Runner is an incredible vision, and I really enjoy being immersed in that world, but I don't think it's necessarily a particularly great movie. But I think the climax of the film makes it very poignant, and it works more like a great poem works. It moves you, and you feel, and you have a response, an emotional response to it. But I don't think it's necessarily as much of an engrossing story. I hate to say this, but I thought Blade Runner 2049, I was more engrossed from a narrative point of view, and I really enjoy that film a great deal. I'd love to have Brian Fuller on this show one day and talk to him specifically about what he told me about Blade Runner 2049, which I thought was great. I won't get into that now, but it's something we could definitely talk about later. But I think Deckard has to be a human. I mean, I really do. So, yeah. So there you go. I love this. I mean, we keep touching on, I keep getting these letters touching on sci-fi touchstones. Here's another sci-fi touchstone letter that I'm glad somebody wrote in. This one comes from Stephen Goggin. Dear Rob, I love the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey and its sequel 2010. What is it? Everybody's the Dave Cullen show. I talk about Dave Cullen show occasionally. He's another YouTuber. I like his commentary. Some people have branded him as a right-winger or a sexist. I don't think so. I really enjoy his commentary. I've watched a lot of his videos, and he recently did an appreciation of Peter Hyams' 2010 that I quite enjoyed, and I recommend everyone check out that video. That's Dave Cullen's video in 2010. I think he dropped it last weekend. I love the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey and its sequel 2010. I think I'm the only person I know who has read all 4 Arthur C. Clarke books in the 2001 Quartet series. 2001, 2010, Jupiter turns into a second sun. 2061, they land on Halley's Comet. 3001, Jupiter returns back to normal. By the way, you know me, man. I read all 4 of those books. I have not done that much reading since, as when I was in art college, I got diagnosed with a condition called Ehrlich syndrome. This is an optical condition that affects how I see things. Dyslexia is a linguistic condition, yet when it comes to reading, I tend to do things called skipping pages, where I would start at the start of a page and then find myself on the next page without realizing I have skipped all the paragraphs in between. I also cannot read office paper, and it has more to do with the types of white paper the words are typed on that prevents me from reading. That's fascinating. I can read on Facebook, but mainly small paragraphs at a time before the letters start to dance around the place. I know I can see through the colored layer of paper that will help me see things normally, but I found sometimes those work and sometimes they do not. Can you get colored glasses? That's fascinating. I know I have the same condition as the actor Johnny Depp, and this is why he wears the funny colored glasses and has a script reader. I love shows like yours that are over an hour long, and I can focus on good conversation without having to read stuff. And this is also why I'm amazed at the quality of Blu-ray discs. I can actually see in depth, and I can actually see depth and perception off Blu-ray. When I was in art college, I came across a term called flatness, and some of the works of Sir David Hockney, like his painting of the Grand Canyon and Peach Blossom Drive Express. David Hockney, like his painting of the Grand Canyon and Peach Blossom Drive, expressed this terminology and helps me see the world the way I do. Possibly also why I love sci-fi and the colors that I see in great films, such as 2001, and I wonder, will the 4 books ever get adapted to film? Yours truly, Stephen G., the Irishman in Somerset. As always, live long and prosper. Well, Stephen G., you know what? I've said it before on the show. I think they should remake 2010 and hew more closely to the book. I think that would be you could easily remake that movie and sure, call it something different. But I do think, and by the way, look, they're making the Foundation series. I think that they should make 2010, 2061, and of course, 3001. I really like 2010 a lot. I love the novel and I like the film, but I think the film is horribly dated because of the Cold War presence that Peter Hyams injected into it. And I know what he thought he was doing when it came out in 84. It made a lot of sense. But how much better would that movie be today if it was about the Russians and the Americans teaming up to beat the Chinese to Europa? And I think that could be great. But, 2061 is a great space adventure, and also 3001. I remember loving the first 40 pages when they find Frank Poole and revive him, and I love the first 40 pages of that book. But my problem with especially 3001 at the end, they explained everything too much, and I also didn't like the fact that the monoliths were broken. I didn't like that. I didn't like that the aliens in 2001, whatever that alien presence is, was shown to be fallible. That bummed me out. But I think all 4 books could actually make a fine miniseries. I don't know if you go back and you make 2001. I mean, to remake 2001, well, look at Peter Hyams, what big brass clanking balls he had to go make a sequel to 2001. But you know what? I think if you made 2001, 2010, 2061, and 3001, it could be really interesting. And I could see that happening. I could absolutely see that happening, especially, with Jeff Bezos and Amazon and all that, with his own space aspirations. I could see that. Look, they're doing the Foundation trilogy. Anything's possible. I would love to see that happen. It'd be pretty great if it did. So I'm right there with you. Stub McShave says, did you ever play the video game XCOM UFO Defense from the 90s, which was heavily inspired by the UFO TV series? You know what? I played it once or twice, but I didn't. The 90s were kind of my lost video game era. I played a lot of video games up to the 90s because I was in LA and I wasn't a console gamer and I wasn't playing video games on my computer. I never really got into that. So I didn't play that a lot. I know the game, but I never played it a lot. It wasn't until my friend Sean, he had the first PlayStation, and then I started playing games with him at his house. But the 90s were sort of the 70s and the 80s. I mean, we did have Pong, and then we had an Atari. I never had Atari 2600. I had in television, but I played a lot with my friends. But yeah, the 90s. So I never really got into that video game, but I know it. I know that video game. It would have been great to have a UFO video game, I think. I think that would have been a lot of fun. Let's see. Again, I have a lot of great letters here. This is a good one too. And again, I've been talking about this lately, but this letter comes from David Atkin. Hi, Rob. As a long-term collector of physical media and anime figures, I have a massive collection of all things geek. In 2007, I got into anime and started a 7-year collection of anime figures, costing me a lot of money. But back then, figures were cheaper compared to now, and prices have doubled or tripled unless you go to Japan and get them, which is how I learned how much cheaper they were. The time came when I was running out of space for the figures to make a choice, whether to keep buying them or save that money. And I chose to save that money. I had the same problem with buying Blu-ray discs and 4Ks. I love physical media, but spending £15 at least for a new release, I was torn. Keep buying to watch a film that I let sit on the shelf for years, or save that money and get a streaming service like Netflix. I chose this, and I will still get my beloved Marvel MCU films, but they still will be admired on my shelf while I watch Endgame on Disney+. To wrap up, I love collecting, but at the end of the day, I hate to say it, it's just easier to turn on the TV and stream your favorite film while a Blu-ray or 4K gathers dust on your shelf. Buying or saving, I chose saving. Thanks, David Atkin. Well, David, I got to tell you, yeah, and I think there are so many cool things now that I love, but my love of these things is a vestige of my childhood because I was a kid that was always disappointed in licensed toys. You know, there's it's not new, but there's a YouTube channel, and I think the guy is Australian, and I forget his name, and I was talking about the other day, but it is called Analog Toys. It's a YouTube channel called Analog Toys, and the guy who runs it, he does these videos. He's the on-camera host. It's funny because he looks like he could be an extra. He seems like a tough dude, but he does these great videos. He both looks historically back at analog toys, and he presents a great overview of different vintage toys from the 70s. Although sometimes he forgets to put things in, which I wonder about. Like, he did this great one on the $6 Million Man toys, but he left out the Bionic Woman Dome House, which I understand was a reuse of a $6 Million Man toy. But for the most part, Analog Toys is a wonderful channel. And his look backs, he did a great look back on Evel Knievel and the Mego Star Trek toys, and his channel's great. But and I have to say, his collection, heavily curated. He doesn't have everything, but he has like the first issues of everything. And I respect the guy, I respect his taste. And anybody who's interested, look, even if you only watch one of his videos, it'll put a smile on your face, whether it's the Evel Knievel video he does, the $6 Million Man video he does. And, you know, when I talk about other YouTubers, I talk about their channels because I genuinely love their content. And it's a new channel I've been watching over the last 2 weeks. I don't know how long he's been doing it, but what a wonderful channel and what a wonderful thing he does. And he's got great taste. That said, and the funny thing is I owned most of the toys he's talking about. I don't have a connection to my old vintage toys. I was always disappointed that they never looked right. So I always wanted to get the best version of the toy that's available. And as I've moved through my life, they've made better toys now. That's why I love Hot Toys figures, because they're the most accurate. I love them. And having vintage toys does not inspire me as much as having brand new toys and all the cool stuff that we get because of how good it is. And when it comes to like Japanese toys, my God. I mean, I grew up loving the Poppy, what are now Bandai Super Robot toys of the 70s, that my parents would bring them home for me. And of course, I love Micronauts, which was a repackage of Japanese toys. The Shogun Warriors that Mattel put out was a repackage of Japanese toys. So I've always loved, but the Japanese die-cast Super Robot toys now, the Bandai Soul of Chogokin line, oh, so good. the Gundam figuration or the Gundam metal build or whatever. Oh my God. Like, but they're so expensive, ridiculously so, because obviously they have to ship them to America. There are things that I can't help but buy, like the Playmo 1/20th scale Valkyrie, Roy Fokker's Valkyrie with the super pack. I mean, come on. I'll probably end up having to build that on camera, because I mean, it's literally like this. How can I not want that? But there's so much good stuff today, and it's hard because, do I need it? Like, I have a hard time. I have a real hard time. I don't know if it's an addiction, but it is a hard desire to break. Like, why should I collect Hot Toys? You know, there's no reason I should. I just like them, and I know it's sort of silly. Same with physical media. I feel like the need to buy physical media is a need that was instilled in me in 1980 when I started buying physical media. And now I dreamt of the day when we could recreate the theatrical experience at home. And it was only with 4K discs that, I mean, Blu-ray as well, because I've seen Blu-rays projected in home theaters. It's amazing. And I feel like I have to go own all of my beloved Blu-ray movies. But even Blu-ray technology is now a decade old, and the compression technology is better. Somebody was talking about this the other day. Like, it is true, when you're playing a disc, the quality is better because there's not as much compression. You can get lossless audio. All of that is true, but they have new compression technology now. So when you're watching things that are streaming on a nice TV, they can look fantastic. And while lossless audio is not necessarily an option yet, but now we're getting with Disney Plus 4K HDR Dolby Vision. I think they've got HDR, HDR10, and Dolby Vision on Disney Plus, and you get Atmos. I mean, I'm hard pressed. All of my Disney discs have, and I don't think I have any that have anything objectionable on them. The reason I would keep a lot of my Disney discs are for the special features, but even then, I was blown away going back and looking at the special features on Endgame on Disney Plus, because there's a lot more special features that are on the 4K disc. I mean, I know tomorrow at Best Buy, for all you completists, is that $500 plus box set of all of the Marvel, the Infinity Saga. All 23 movies in the Infinity Saga are coming out in a big box set. Now, I'll admit, I would have been all over that shit. And there were so many times when my finger was poised over the button, like, I didn't get it. I didn't buy it. I did not buy. I mean, there's extra expenses that are coming up here at home. Elizabeth's going back to school. And I was like, I'm going to buy that 4K set. You know what, though? I realized first of all, I'd already acquired. I've got all the MCU movies in 4K now. And then looking at Disney Plus, I was like, if you guys are a fan of Avengers Endgame, that scene on Vormir where Hawkeye and Black Widow, the original scene that they had filmed, I was like, wow, it's totally different. Imagine the scene where Hawkeye and Black Widow are on Vormir with the Red Skull. There's a scene that it's a huge action scene where Thanos and his troops show up. Now, I'm sure that's on that extra disc. I'm like, I got to get that extra. No. And now I'm thinking to myself, I look at my MCU shelf, because I've got almost a whole shelf, because not only do I have the 4K discs, I've got the 3D discs, and sometimes they didn't release them domestically, so I had to get them from the UK. So I have the 4K disc and a 3D disc. And I look at that stuff and all of these vestiges from my childhood. It's like, really? You know, my grandmother, actually my step-grandmother, but my grandmother, Sissy Schoenfeld, Shirley, but everybody called her Sissy. My grandfather, Ralph, and myself, we were the collectors of the family. And my grandmother always used to say, she's like, you know, and she was rich. And she always used to say, I don't understand you and your grandfather collect things. She would always say, I don't understand why you collect things, because you can't take them with you. And she said, what's important is to use your money and save it up and go have experiences, go do things with people and have memories and fun. And, you know, you physically get into water you'd never been in before. You see things you haven't seen, and you take those memories with you. And she said to me once, she said, at the same time, I mean, she said, you can whatever you buy, whether it's a model spaceship or she knew action figures, and she was the one, she bought me a lot of soundtrack albums when I was a kid because she knew I love soundtrack albums. But she was the one that also started taking me to the symphony. She was the one I called up when I said, hey, they're playing the Seattle Symphony is doing Beethoven's Ninth with a 153-piece choral section. Can you hook us up? And my grandmother and I went and saw Beethoven's Ninth. I didn't want to tell her that I love Beethoven's Ninth because of Clockwork Orange, but that was the case. But she'd be like, see, isn't this better than having a record? I mean, records obviously were inexpensive, but I said, yeah, it is. And she goes, wouldn't you love to go to the symphony every night and have a really nice dinner? And I'm like, yes. Yes, I would. but barring that, this vestige of my childhood, action figures now are better than they've ever been. Model kits are better than they've ever been. They're bigger. The best toys are being made now, whether it's die-cast Japanese super robots. Like, look, man, I'm not going to lie. That new Gundam, that $900, and when I say new Gundam, I don't mean it's just new. I mean the new Gundam from Char's Counterattack. It's 1/60th scale. It's perfect grade scale. I want that. And that might very well be the last Japanese die-cast super robot I ever need to buy. Because once you get a certain amount of things, like I have a fetish for Valkyries from Robotech. But I think if you get that 6-scale Valkyrie cockpit, that model kit, I got my Roy Fokker helmet. I could do my little Valkyrie display. I don't need to buy anything more from Robotech for the rest of my life. So I can put that aside. As much as I love Valkyries, or I'll probably have to get a nice, if Playmax makes a 120 scale Patroid, I need to get that. But I know it's crazy. And look, I gave up Star Wars toys. I did not get into the Black Series. I didn't get in 12 scale. I still collect 6-scale Star Wars figures, but I did not buy anything from the sequel trilogy. I like the prequel trilogy figures, and I like the original trilogy figures. So I'm slowly weaning myself off of that. I'm slowly getting, I think maybe a couple more years and I'll be done collecting anything. I might have to continue on with Hot Toys, but I even think physical media. So it's tough. Now you're undergoing, all of you are watching Rob's therapy session. But it's tough. I mean, I also, when things wouldn't go right in the entertainment business, I'd go buy a figure or buy a disc or buy a comic, buy an omnibus, buy something. And it would make me feel better. But even that, it's like, So David, I want to thank you for that letter. It's tough. And I think you're right. Save your money and go have adventures. Wouldn't it be cooler to say, go to London and go see No Time to Die and meet some of you out there and go on some crazy, I've done it before. And I have to tell you, people are like, what a waste of money. I'm like, no way. That was money that was well spent. And it was an experience, and it's fun. And I think it's probably better. You reach a point in your life where you don't have to buy anything more. You don't need any more stuff. You're going to see more of my stuff when I move into my set, and I'm going to have cameras around, so you'll be able to see more of that and set it all up. But I think you're right, man. I think you're right. Since we're on the nostalgia tip, hang on before I go on the nostalgia tip. I've seen that people have been sending in things. Tiberius Monk 84 is here. Hello there, Rob. Any favorite sci-fi video games? Well, so many video games are sci-fi. I mean, I could take you through like Rob's video game history. My favorite arcade games, I have 3 stand-up arcade games. First of all, Defender and its sequel. I love Defender. I loved Star Castle, which is a vector game, and I love a side-scrolling game called Scramble. Love those games. But as far as my favorite video game of all time, that I've ever played that I was obsessed by. I've never been so obsessed by a video game. I've said this before, was Activision's revamp of Battlezone from the late 90s. And it was the only thing that kept me from going insane while I was editing Free Enterprise. I love that game. I love the physics of that game. I love that it was a real-time strategy game and a first-person shooter. I loved that game. And I thought it was great. As far as Star Wars games go, I loved Shadows of the Empire. I played Shadows of the Empire a lot. I love that game. I love GoldenEye. I guess GoldenEye really isn't a science fiction video game. And then there's been a lot of, Gun Valkyrie. You remember that game? It was an Xbox game. I really liked Mech Warrior. Was it Mech Warrior where you had the console? I like that game a lot. And then, I played a lot of licensed video games that weren't necessarily great, whether it was like The Thing or the X-Files game, stuff like that. But now I really haven't played video games in the last couple of years. However, I gotta say, I really want to play Jedi Fallen Order. Force Unleashed. Force Unleashed 1. And my favorite video games I played, and they're not all totally whatchamacallit. Hang on, my computer just went to sleep. The last games that I was really into, I loved the Onimusha games. I love the Devil May Cry games. And I know I haven't played Devil May Cry 5. I love the Grand Theft Auto games. Those aren't really sci-fi games, obviously, but those are the games. I just haven't played video games in the last 3 or 4 years, really. But I do want to get, I didn't even buy a PlayStation 4 because I just had too much I was doing, and I get sucked into video games and I get obsessed with them. But I really want to play Fallen Order, and I've really wanted to play Spider-Man. So I don't know if that answers your question. Mark C is here. Mark C says, growing up, my favorite toy outside of Star Wars was my Mego-sized deluxe Lone Ranger and Silver from Gabriel. Oh my God. If anyone out there has the set complete, my email is on the Burnettwork website. Mark C, you have got to go watch. Analog Toys did a whole episode about the Lone Ranger. Dude. Okay, what Mark C is saying is in the 70s, there was a toy company called Gabriel that made Lone Ranger toys. Now, I only had the Lone Ranger and Tonto and their horses. Now, I remember them like you. They were actually bigger than Mego size. They were 10 inches, so they were bigger than regular Mego dolls, and they were shorter. They were smaller than G.I. Joes or 12-inch Megos. Dude, I had no idea that the line was as big as it was. There was all kinds of Lone Ranger toys released in Europe, and I don't know what happened to my Lone Ranger toys because I loved those toys, and the horses were great. You have walk, don't run, and go and watch Analog Toys' video about the Lone Ranger toys because it's awesome, and it'll make you weep. But those figures were great, and I forgot how good they were. In my memory, they were always good, but watching that video again, I realized how great those were. So, yeah. Mark C says, the MCU is great, but if you want to see the Avengers at their best, go get the animated Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. I never watched that. Everyone says that, though, that it's really good. I definitely should go watch that. But, man, you, dude, wait till you watch this Lone Ranger, the piece that Analog Toys did on Lone Ranger, because I was like fascinated. I had no idea the line was as big as it was because I only ever had Lone Ranger and Tonto. I don't think I ever knew that there was anything but those. You know what else? There was and I look, I'm sure a cursory glance at the internet could help me out with this, but I remember there was like a Boy Scout action figure, but there was also like a husky, like a husky dog action figure that you could get like not a backpack, but a thing that he would pull around like a high tech, like a sled. I don't know what it was, but I got to go look into that. But that was something I had the same time I had the Lone Ranger figures. I don't know what happened to those. Anyway, Douglas Root has sent me a letter, and this is I love letters when people send me letters about their experience growing up, and this is one of them. Hello, Rob. Thanks for answering my last letter regarding movie distributors and their revenue share. Oh, yeah, I don't know if I did the best job in that, but I tried. I'm definitely interested in learning more about the movie business and plan on sending other questions in on that subject soon. In the meantime, I'd like to talk about growing up as a kid in the 1970s and 80s who loved science fiction. During a family vacation to Miami Beach in 1977, my dad took me to see Star Wars. I remember it being sold out and waiting on a long, winding line for hours before finally getting in. Immediately, the opening scene blew me away. We both loved that movie, but more deeply, I felt as if I was reborn into a new and wild world. As soon as we got home in Staten Island, New York, my dad took me to the local record store to buy the soundtrack, and I played that album all year long. Star Wars was an adventure that directly spoke to me. It made me believe that I could do anything, fed my mind with new dreams. In my room with my eyes closed and the movie soundtrack playing loudly in the background, I would daydream about having a lightsaber fight and flying an X-Wing fighter into a space battle. But not every kid liked Star Wars. A lot of my friends played sports and their heroes were ball players. Star Wars was but a joke to them. One day, while at the mall's bookstore, I noticed a new magazine named Omni. Along with great images, Omni magazine featured a variety of articles on science, astrophysics, chemistry, biology, as well as short works of science fiction and fantasy stories, movie previews, and sci-fi centric cartoons. I clearly remember one of my favorite cartoons featured a thirsty alien crawling on a barren Martian desert with the word bubble above its head saying, "Methane. I need methane. Methane." I used to cut out pages of Omni's images and cartoons to hang them on my bedroom walls right below my hanging Revell models of World War II fighter aircraft. Eventually, my walls were filled with pages and pages from the magazine. My room looked awesome. I was immersed in my own personal fandom. What a great magazine. I also loved creature features and thriller theater with the six-finger hand rising from the grave every Friday and Saturday night. I would sit in front of my black and white TV waiting to be transported into the realm of the supernatural. There were also a number of weekly TV shows that I was loyal to. Kolchak the Night Stalker, The Sixth Sense, and Night Gallery, as well as the ones in syndication. Space 1999, UFO, Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, The Prisoner, and my favorite, Star Trek. And when I finally got color TV, holy crap, Scotty, Star Trek was in color, and it was awesome. It was a whole new experience for me. Now it looked like real life. During the summers, when I was able to stay up late, I would beg my dad to buy TV Guide so I could find out what late night movies were playing. The TV Guide was my Rosetta Stone, critical for finding what was playing. Without it, I would be left up to chance to find out what sci-fi and horror movies were playing. I couldn't bear to miss even one. And God forbid there were two movies playing at the same time on two different channels. There was no VCR to go. There was no VCR to go to, and how this would drive me insane. As there were many other things I enjoyed doing, reading science fiction books, going to B movies, building glow-in-the-dark model kits, buying poster art, and more. I guess my point is, it took a lot of effort to indulge yourself. Nothing was at your fingertips. There was no internet, no YouTube. It was up to you to be resourceful and find it on your own. You had to be dedicated, so deep dives into magazines, books, movies, TV, radio, and each time you found something new, your imagination grew and expanded, molding and transforming you into a fan. This was my journey into fandom as a kid in the 70s. Star Wars was the spark that inspired my adventure. It challenged me, and like Indiana Jones, I was on a quest for knowledge. Knowledge that motivated me to explore further, dig deeper, sacrifice more and more time, even if it meant I had to go it alone, be different. This was my adventure into fandom, and my journey still continues. We all have a story to tell. That's what you say. I'm curious how much of mine is as in common with yours and others. Yours in fandom, Douglas Root. Well, Douglas, my friend, you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay, and we certainly did back in the day, yo. I was just like you. I mean, I did the same thing. One of the funny things that you bring up, and it's so funny to try and explain to people this now, because a lot of people look at you and they're like, what? I mean, the TV Guide does exist. But when I was a kid, the biggest day of the week, and it became even bigger when I turned 13, was my mom going grocery shopping on Wednesdays. She would go grocery shopping on Wednesdays, the day the new TV Guide would come out. Sometimes she would wait and go on Thursdays, and that was interminable. Like I felt like it was a personal affront when my mom went to the grocery store on Thursday. So my mom, just like I guess you too, my mom would bring home the TV Guide, and the TV Guide was like this digest-sized magazine that literally had every single TV program on by time, on the hour or the half hour, usually. Now, one of the things kids quickly figured out during this time was that there were a lot of movies that were played on after hours. Like my bedtime was 9 o'clock. I think it was 8 o'clock, then 9 o'clock. And I would look at the TV Guide and I would see what was playing. And, sometimes I'd beg my parents to stay up, or if I was lucky, I would have a babysitter on a Friday or Saturday night. And my parents weren't planning to come home until 1 or 2, which meant that after the news was over, which was usually at 11:30, I might be able to stay up until 1 in the morning. And then the deal I had with my babysitters is that when our garage door opened, I had to run upstairs and get into my bed and pretend I was sleeping. So finding out what movies were playing late night, and you're always on the lookout for sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, whatever was out. And Friday and Saturday nights were a big deal, but during the week, it was like, who puts these movies on during the week? It was so annoying until I got a VCR. And then, of course, I would scour the TV guides and I would pre-program, I just had to make sure the tapes would get in there. And it was important. Those were the heady days. And you're right. I didn't have anybody that was as into it because it was like a singular thing. Even before Star Wars, Logan's Run, that was a big deal for me. And the thing was, it was very difficult to convey to another kid or your parents just how into this stuff you really were. I mean, my parents knew that they could tell how deeply enmeshed with all of this my personality was. And I was lucky in the 7th grade. I had a girlfriend, Jennifer, my first girlfriend, Jennifer Epstein. Her father had bought a bootleg cassette of Star Wars. It was the second bootleg cassette of Star Wars I knew that anyone had. So we would go to her house like every day after school in the 7th grade. It was great. It was particularly great because of what we did after, but it was important at the time. And I just didn't have friends most of my friends, I played sports too, and I was a social kid, but nobody wanted to hear it. Plus, it was a little difficult to explain to somebody how much time you spent poring over the blueprints of, say, the Starship Enterprise, or looking at the Star Wars sketchbook, or listening to the Star Wars soundtrack, as you put it, dreaming that you were fighting the battles against the Sith. I mean, you couldn't explain it to anybody. And for me, I spent a lot of my youth alone, like before I could drive, taking the bus to go to stores all over the greater Seattle area. Sometimes, you'd take 3 buses to get one videotape, and I'd bring it home, and then I have to take it back the next day. And it was a big deal. And it took a lot of effort. Nowadays, there is no effort. You just go online, find what you want. It's all there. It's crazy. But yeah, it's a different time, but you and I had a very similar upbringing. So, thank you for writing in with that, because what a great remembrance. And nowadays it's funny because people still buy things, but they don't. I just don't think things marinate because there's so much of it now. It's hard. It'd be difficult to explain how much time we all did spend looking for this stuff. Anthony Gonzalez says, one of my favorite Star Trek film scenes ever. Watching the entire crew search the ship for a pair of gravity boots. So well edited. Well, Anthony, that's from Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. I kind of have problems with that kind of thing. I mean, I know what Nicholas Meyer was doing. It just seemed it was a little bit of a throwback. A lot of what I like Star Trek VI, but when they're flipping through books trying to speak Klingonese and all that, I never bought that then. I still don't buy it now. There's a lot of goofy stuff. For the most part, I really like Star Trek VI a lot, but it's those kind of throwback scenes that belong in a movie from the 20th century that seem a little goofy, but it is a good scene. I do like it. Is well edited. If the shoe fits, it's good stuff, even though if it is a little goofy. This is an interesting letter. Well, it's not. I love this letter. Roberto Suarez writes in and says, "Hey, Rob, after seeing the first episode of The Mandalorian, I wonder if the unfolding story will take its cues from Lone Wolf and Cub. Perhaps Favreau is getting his inspiration from this classic samurai tale in much the same way Lucas was inspired by Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress." Well, for those of you who don't know, the Lone Wolf and Cub comic series, which you can get all of it. Now I'm going to butcher these Japanese names, and if Lynn Hobday and Liam are watching, they're going to kill me for this. But the original Japanese title was Kojiro Okami, and it literally means wolf taking along his child. But for those of you who don't know, Lone Wolf and Cub is basically about a masterless samurai, a ronin, who is double-crossed by his lord. And his lord double-crosses him, his wife gets killed, and the samurai goes on the road of vengeance with him. He goes and he takes his baby son, Daigoro, along. And they made, first of all, the comic, and I can't, these names are terrible. Kaizu Koike, and of course, Gozeki Kojima, the artist. And Koike was the writer. Kaizuo Koike, it's terrible. I'm trying to read these. And Gozeki Kojima was the artist. It ran for thousands of pages, and it's been republished by Dark Horse, and it was great. Now, they made 6 Lone Wolf and Cub feature films, which are awesome. And I love all 6. But I first discovered, as many people did, I first discovered Lone Wolf and Cub in 1980 when a compilation movie was released called, say it with me now, Shogun Assassin. Now, Shogun Assassin is one of it was renowned because the show, the series, the movies are incredibly violent. There's dismemberings, there's people getting their heads cut off. It's great, or their heads split in half. I mean, the violence is awesome. And I'm 13 years old. I'm watching this thing, and Shogun Assassin is the only movie in history that I would ever. Actually, no, I have 2. Shogun Assassin being the first live action. The other one is Fantastic Planet. That I would dare say, watch the American dubbed version. Shogun Assassin is a compilation of 2 of the Lone Wolf and Cub movies, but it's just so awesome. It's got an electronic disco score, and the movie is narrated by Daigoro, which is one of the producer's kids doing the voiceover. They basically sat this kid down, and they just had the kid repeat lines of dialogue. They would feed him the lines of dialogue, and they recorded what he was saying. I'm convinced it's the greatest child narration of all time, and I love it so much. You got to watch Shogun Assassin. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you've never heard of Lone Wolf and Cub, first of all, the comic is awesome. If you want to go and read an incredible example of Japanese comics, of manga, get all the Lone Wolf and Cub comics because they're beautiful. It's mostly all artwork. There's not a lot of dialogue, but they're incredible comics. Go get the comics. Criterion did release, and I'll just show it to you. Criterion released this box set. Not only does it have all of the original 6 Lone Wolf and Cub movies on it, it also contains Shogun Assassin, which is available separately. But I want to say this came out like 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. Somebody asked me, this is just a couple weeks ago on Twitter, if I had ever opened up the container in the flap and saw what was in there. Now, I never had. I just opened up this. You slide the box out, and it's really cool, right? So I didn't know anything about it. I'm like, what are you talking about? So check this out. Kudos to Criterion. So they asked me if I'd ever opened up the flap. I never had. So I'm going to open it up with you right now, and I'm going to take away the surprise. So I opened up the flap, and lo and behold, look at this. Look what Criterion, I'd never seen this. It's blueprints for like the super James Bond-esque baby cart in the movies, because like the Lone Wolf and Cub movies are called like Baby Cart at the River Styx. I know this is probably some silly thing, but I have to say, when I opened this up, and I didn't even know this, I had this disc for a long time, there's a secret little compartment in this flap. So when you open up the disc, you wouldn't even know this was here. I don't know how I didn't know this. There's no reason I would, but I just want to say thank you. And I don't remember the name of whoever sold that to me or told me that. It's amazing. Lone Wolf and Cub, ladies and gentlemen. You learn something new every day, even about things that you own. But do I think ultimately that The Mandalorian I won't say what happened for those of you who didn't see it, but there is if in fact The Mandalorian does become, let's just say yes. The answer to your question is yes. I do think that The Mandalorian was inspired by Lone Wolf and Cub. Now I don't want to say why, but I think you are absolutely correct in your assessment that yes, I think Jon Favreau, when he was coming up with the idea for The Mandalorian, but we'll see. I don't know to be honest, where it's all going to go. But I think you're right. I think you're right. So yes. Yes. Now let's see. You know what I've got here? I got a treat for you guys. No, I think I'll save it for tomorrow. No, I'll do it right now. Why not? I have to find this. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a Willow Yang letter. Yes, I do. Willow Yang sent me a letter. When Willow sends me a letter, it's a glorious day in the neighborhood. That's what I say. So Willow Yang, as we all know, is working her way through all 7 seasons of Star Trek: The Next Generation and has sent in this letter. It's another review of one of the great episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation from the 3rd season. So I'm just going to let her take this away. Greetings, Rob. Since you've recently read a letter on your show that mentioned Next Generation's The Offspring, I'm sending you my thoughts on the episode. What I particularly appreciated about The Offspring is how it is able to be both wonderfully humorous and entertaining, while simultaneously posing some heady and insightful questions on humanity and artificial intelligence. If I have one criticism, it's that I felt the ending was a bit rushed. The character of Admiral Haftel was quite rigid and adamant in his views throughout the episode, only to do a complete 180-degree turn in the last 5 minutes. I understand that he was moved by Data's devotion and determination to save his child, but I found the way his transition was executed to be too abrupt. I also thought that Data seemed to get over Lol's death far too quickly. He claims that he does not experience emotion, yet he has exhibited attachment in the past, most notably keeping a hologram of Tasha Yar. And although he has downloaded Lol's memories so that she can live on through him, that still doesn't resolve the issue that he is now, once again, the only member of his kind. Or is he, Willow? Well, remember, you've already met Lore. On one hand, The Offspring works as a charming but also heartbreaking story about Data as he navigates around the perils of parenthood with the creation of his android child, Lol. The episode contains some of my favorite Data moments from the series thus far. I really enjoyed the deliberation between him and Picard in the waiting room after the latter had learned of the former's creation. The scene is both profound and yet also humorous. Picard has a very human and understandable reaction to Data's actions, being both angered that he hadn't been consulted on the matter and also concerned over Lol's existence and what ramifications that could have. Data, on the other hand, views his actions as being the normal process of all life forms. There is just an innocence, almost naivete to his character as he rambles on about his confusion regarding parenting to an increasingly exasperated Picard that I found endearing. The relationship between Data and Lol is a delight to watch. I love Hallie Todd's portrayal of the newly created android. She brings a sweetness and innocence to the character that makes her easy to root for. One memorable comedic scene occurred when Lal was observing a couple in 10 forward, first expressing bewilderment when the two began smooching, and then asking Guinan some awkward questions when the couple leaves the room. Although we don't unfortunately get to see Data having to give his daughter the talk, we do see him take on the role of offended father when he walks in on Lal kissing an unsuspecting Riker. This humorous moment transitions perfectly into a poignant one where Lal and Data discuss human behavior and emotions, culminating with Lal holding Data's hand. The Offspring does a phenomenal job of depicting the growth and transformation of a character as they evolve from learning basic actions like drinking or catching a ball to studying human interactions and behaviors to asking profound existential questions about the purpose and meaning of life in the span of less than 45 minutes. We witness the entire course of someone's life, from birth to development to their tragic end. On the more philosophical side of things, The Offspring poses some very interesting questions regarding life and the meaning of existence. Data explains to Picard that he created Lal after realizing that he is currently the only member of his kind. Survival of a species, the assurance that one's habitable or heritable traits will be passed on and persist even after an individual has died, is perhaps the main driving force underlying all life. Although Data has exhibited an instinct for preserving his own existence, as evidenced by his refusal to undergo Maddox's experiments when he believed they were unsafe for him, his sentience is just the beginning of his evolution as a life form. I love how The Offspring presents the next logical progression in Data's understanding of life and humanity by having him being faced with the existential questions regarding his purpose and seeking a means to ensure the persistence of his kind even after his own existence has come to an end. In many ways, I think The Offspring builds on the debate that was started in Measure of a Man by going even deeper into the social issues that people, human or artificial, face, and whether or not true equality can ever be achieved. Probably my favorite line comes when Picard berated Data for creating an android without consulting him first, resulting in a confused Data stating, "I have not observed anyone else on board consulting you about their procreation, Captain." On one hand, the line is a witty, albeit unintentionally so, comeback on Data's part. On the other, it is also incredibly insightful. Is it fair that Data has to seek permission to have children while no such restrictions are apparently in place for other life forms? Is the government violating Data's rights and intervening and trying to remove Lal from him? As Data points out, Admiral Haftel was probably not much better parent when he first had children. Why is the onus being put on Data to prove himself fit to be a parent, whereas humans face no such scrutiny? The prejudices and problems that an oppressed individual or group faces typically cannot be resolved by a single case. Rather, it is often a long and gradual progression with numerous roadblocks along the way. Picard recognizes Data as a sentient life form and has fought vigorously for his rights to autonomy, and yet even he still doesn't quite regard Data as a true equal who's afforded the same rights and liberties that other crew members may take for granted. The Offspring has succeeded in forcing both Picard and myself to examine our own worldviews to be able to see from the perspective of someone completely different from us and the struggles that they face, and that, for me, is its greatest accomplishment. Live long and prosper, Willow Yang. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you like that letter, as I did, Willow Yang has her own section on the Burnettwork.net website, Willow Talk. And I recommend you read all of her letters. They are all worth reading. What a great analysis of one of the Next Generation's better episodes, especially one of the great episodes of the third season. I love The Offspring. And for those of you who are keeping track, that is also the first episode directed by Jonathan Frakes, number one himself. He, yes, directed that episode, and that was the first one he ever directed. So I'm glad, Willow, that you liked it. And everybody, if you like Next Generation, you know, that's always an episode you can revisit. It's so good, so well played by everybody, and it is heartbreaking at the end. Well, ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I'm going to be signing off. This is the end of ROBServations, episode number 276. As always, I'd like to thank my great moderating staff. I'd like to thank Detective Jim, Greg Smith, Terry, the Sheriff of Nottingham, the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden, and our two new additions who are quickly becoming veterans, Jordy Lyons, and of course, Lewis Yu. Thank them for making this, the Post-Geek Singularity, a great place to hang out. So thanks to the moderators, and thanks to all of you for supporting the channel, whether it's through super chats, whether it's just going to the website. The website, by the way, I mean, people have been it's been burning up the website. People have been, it's great interacting, going there, commenting, the 3-word reviews people are commenting on. And remember, if you go to the website and do anything, just leave a comment, you will be entered into a Lucky Tiger sweepstakes. Well, it's not really a sweepstakes. It's just a random giveaway, but you can win a bottle of Lucky Tiger all over body wash, head to tail body wash. It's delightful. And we'll be giving 1 bottle away. I know it's not a PlayStation 4, but we'll be giving a bottle away every week until the 300th episode of ROBSERVATIONS, the show about something. And again, I want to thank you for all your letters. I have a backlog of letters, so if I haven't read one of your recent letters, and I don't read all the letters. We put letters up on the website, of course, that I don't read. I just, I read ones that strike my fancy or philosophically engage me, and it and it hits me that day. So don't ever take it personally if I only put your letters up on the website and I don't read them aloud, because there's so many, which is a good problem to have. So I want to thank you for all of that. And like I always say, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I'm going to bid you farewell. And as I say when I sign off, as always, what do I say? As always, have a better day.